Hello and welcome. This is the finished animation you will have by finishing this tutorial. This is level 2. There was a level 1 video where we actually make the drone itself. You can either go back and follow along with that tutorial, or you can just go to my site and get all of these tutorial files for free and just start off at this level 2 scene. Alright, let's get started. Okay, this is where we left off from level 1. If you didn't do level 1 or you didn't want to, but you want to follow along with this tutorial, you can get the complete scene for free on my website, Learn-Blender 3D. So the first thing I'm going to do in the top left here, I'm going to click on camera and that will select it. With my mouse in the center, I'm going to hit X and enter, so I'm going to delete that because we don't really need that camera. And I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into my front view, and I'm going to go ahead and save. Okay, and I just want to set things up so that we can animate this easily. And there's two things I'm going to do and then explain it as I go along. I'm going to hold shift, hit A, and I'm going to add in an empty, and I'm going to do a single arrow. Then I'm going to hit S for scale, drag it out until it points, sticks out a decent amount, and then left click. I'm going to hold shift, hit A, hover over empty. This time I'm going to do a plane axis, click on that. And again, I'm going to hit S for scale until it's sticking out, left click, so that I can actually select it easily. And as I said, I'll describe why we did that more as we keep going. Okay, and the first thing I want to do is I'm going to left click on this base. So when I want these to rotate, and I want the turrets the guns to rotate with it. So I'm actually going to left click on the guns themselves. I'm going to shift left click on the little base there. I'm going to hold control, hit P, that will parent it, and we want to click on object keep transforms. So if I left click with just the base selected, and I hit R for rotate and Y, and just start moving this around, my mouse around, you can see those are now rotating together. Actually, it's kind of hard to see, but the base is rotating with the turret. It'll be easier to see later. But I'm going to hit escape on that. I just wanted to show you. So now I'm going to, we already have the base selected. I'm going to shift left click on everything else. So do it in the same order as me. So I'm going to shift left click on the wings here. I'm going to shift left click on this light. And remember, those two are connected with it. I'm going to shift left click on the body here, shift left click on the camera, and shift left click on this base. So we have the whole drone itself selected. Now this is very important. You could have done that in any order, but now I'm going to shift left click on this arrow here. I'm going to hold control, hit P, and then click on object keep transforms. Left click. And so now if I left click on that arrow and hit G, oh, I think I had an error there for my computer in a second. So let me left click, hit G. All of those objects are now moving whenever I move that arrow. I'm going to hit escape. And now with that arrow selected, I'm going to shift left click on this other empty, hold control, hit P, click on keep transforms. Now the point of this is that I can left click and move all of the drone. I'm going to escape on that. And then I can left click on this empty, hit G, and everything will move with it, including that arrow, and I'm going to hit escape. And the point of that is I'm going to left click on this. We're going to animate this so that there's an up and down movement that the drone will kind of just do a little hovering effect. But all of that will follow this other empty. It'll make more sense as we keep going. I'm going to go ahead and save. Alright, so I'm going to hit N to bring up my right panel here. And so yeah, we want to animate it up and down. So it's going to be on the Z axis. And something I want to do real quick is I'm going to hit the lock for X and Y because I only want to ever let it be able to move on the Z. And it's just nice to kind of have the assurance that you're not going to click anything else. And before we continue, let's add a camera in because it'll be a little bit easier to watch this with a camera. So I'm going to hold shift, hit A, hover over camera. I'm going to hit 7 or numpad 7 to go my top view. I'm going to middle mouse to zoom out. And let's hit S to scale and pull that out till it's about like that. I'm going to hit G and Y, so I'm moving out in the Y. And I just kind of want to move it so that the drone fills up the whole scene here. So if I hit 0, numpad 0, I'll be in my camera view now. And yeah, so that's pretty good. Now I'm going to left click back onto this and we can start animating it now. Okay, so really we just need 2 points to animate here. So we can really even leave this at 0. So I'm gonna right click. I like to just insert a single keyframe, and then let's go ahead to maybe even like 40. I guess I shouldn't really be dragging in there. You can click in here and jump to 40. And then let's just move this value up a bit. So I'm gonna click and drag in the middle. So let's see, maybe like 0.4 will be a good value. I'm just gonna right click and insert another single keyframe. So if I click this arrow here to jump to the very beginning and hit spacebar, you will see this played back, and it's actually going really slow. I'm only getting like 3 frames per second, so that's not very good. I'm gonna hit spacebar to turn that off. You can hit Z and go to solid, and if I jump back and hit spacebar, well, it's actually not going much faster, which is kind of surprising. So that's not going to be great to get a sense for how fast this is moving. So we're going to have to do something about that in a moment. For now though, let's keep going. So right now we just have 2 keyframes, but if I get my mouse up in this top corner here, where actually it's got to be right up here, and then left click and drag to pull down. I'm going to split my window here, and then I'm going to left click on that little icon and change this to the graph editor. So I've got these 2 points here, and this is the 2 keyframes that we have. Let's see here. You can see at 40, there's a little dot there, and let's see, if I pull this little guy at the bottom, we can see more of our timeline to the left. So we've got our 2 little points. You also can scroll in with your middle mouse and then shift middle mouse to pan around just like we always do. And let's see, what do I want to do? So first up, I'm going to hit A to select all of them. If I click this normalize, it'll kind of zoom in so we can see them a little bit better. And then under key, we're going to go to, let's see, we need to add F curve modifier and click cycles. So what that's going to do is it's going to repeat the keyframes that we had. And so it's going from 0 to 40 to 0 to 40. But let's go ahead and click down here and jump to 80. And I'm going to change this Z value to 0. Right click and insert single keyframe. So now since we have these 3 points going, we only set these 3 points, but that F curve modifier we added is continuing it on over and over again. So I'm gonna go ahead and save. Alright, so we're done with this bottom window, so I'm gonna left click and drag. Oops, sometimes I do this. I guess man, this is frustrating when this happens to you. I think I went the wrong direction, so that's why I'm opening a new window. But so close up all your windows. I'm gonna hit Z and go back. Actually, I'm gonna hit escape on that. Let's just jump back to the beginning and hit spacebar. Again, the frames per second is going really slow for me, but let's just do a quick preview. Okay, so it's going up, it's going back down, and we only have these 3 keyframes, but since we add that F curve modifier, it's just going to keep doing that. So it is going back up again, so that's good. Now we just want to get ourselves a better preview. That playback was just too slow to see if this is a good speed and amount for it to move up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this where it says EV. I'm going to change it to workbench, and this is actually what we're seeing in the preview, and this should just render a lot faster for us, and we can get a better preview of how things are looking. So if we actually just click render animation, it'll start rendering this out. And actually, I'm gonna hit escape on that, hit escape a couple times. This is taking too long, I don't want you to watch all this, so I jumped to the printer icon. I'm gonna change this to 50. That should help things go faster. And we're not gonna need all the frames. I'm gonna click in here and change it to 120, hit enter. And let's go ahead and do render animation. And so it's just gonna go through and it's gonna render all these frames, and we'll get a good preview of the speed. So, you know, let this finish on your computer. I'm gonna stop recording and pick back up once it's done. Okay, so I'm actually gonna, so it's finished. I'm gonna close that window. Up here at render, I'm gonna click on that, and this time I'm gonna click on view animation. And so it should pop up a window where it's playing the animation here. And so actually I think this is a pretty good speed. It's kind of got that nice little hover effect, but it's not too fast, it's not going up too high. I actually think that's pretty good. So, but feel free to adjust this on your own. So I'm gonna close this. You could spread these keyframes out further. You could jump to this middle one and change the amount. That's how you would adjust this for your liking. But I liked it, so I'm gonna change this resolution back up to 100 just so I don't forget to do that later. And under the little camera icon, I'm gonna change it back to Eevee. So yeah, we just did that to get a good, quick render test to see how fast things were going. All right, I am tired of looking at it all boring, so I'm gonna hit Z and go into rendered view again. And let's see here. Let's, we now have this all done, but we want 3 different drones in our final scene. So in this top right panel where it's the outliner, I'm gonna left click and drag the camera and just pull it down. That way it's not in this collection. If I turn this collection on off, you can see it's got everything, it's got all the drone and nothing else in it now. And so I'm just gonna right click, actually first let me double click in here and type drone, hit enter. And I'm just gonna right click on it and duplicate collection. So now I have another duplicate. I'm gonna right click on it and duplicate collection again. And I don't wanna confuse myself. I'm gonna go ahead and turn both of these off so you don't see them, but it's just really nice. We're gonna animate using that curve, and now we just have exact replicas perfectly in the center of our scene, and that's just gonna make things really easy for us. Okay, so I'm also gonna just make sure I'm at frame 1, so I'm gonna click here and jump back to frame 1. Oh, I'm noticing we're only at 120 frames per second, so let's go ahead, or not per second, total length. So I'm gonna click on the printer again and change this N back up to 250. This is just controlling how long the animation is. All right, and what we're gonna do is I'm gonna hold Shift, hit A. This time we're gonna go to, where is it, curve, and click on Bezier. And then I'm gonna hit the numpad 7 to go to my top view. It's really small right now, but you can kind of see it there. I'm gonna hit R for rotate 90 and hit enter. I'm gonna hit S for scale. I'm gonna type in 100 and hit enter. And I'm gonna scroll out a bit. So you see it's really big and long. So I zoomed out. I'm gonna hit G and Y. I just wanna move this on the Y. I just want that endpoint to be where, so I'm actually gonna scroll back in, hit G and Y. I just want the endpoint to be about where this drone is right here. And so if I hit number pad 1, it's kind of hard to see. I'm actually gonna middle mouse around so you can see and zoom out. So this is gonna be the path that the drone is following. So you can edit this however you want. So I have it selected, so I'm gonna tab into the edit mode for the curve, and I'm gonna left click on this back. So you can see there's the center point, and then these are called control handles. I'm gonna left click on the center one. I'm gonna hit numpad 1 to go into my front view. And I'm just gonna hit G, and I'm just gonna bring this up. So this is gonna mean that the drone's starting really high up, and at the end it's gonna fly in and go here. I'm gonna hit numpad 3 and zoom out just to see the flight. So yeah, it's flying and then over. I'm gonna hit numpad 1. All right, I'm gonna tab out of edit mode, and we can always edit that later. But let's just see how this is gonna be looking. So I'm gonna zoom in, shift middle mouse to pan. So now I'm gonna left click. I want the empty. I don't want the arrow empty. I don't want this empty. I want the other empty. I'm gonna click on that. In this right panel where it's the object constraints, I'm gonna add a constraint, and I'm gonna click on this follow path. I'm gonna click on the little eyedropper here, and I'm gonna left click on that path. And we don't see it at all right now, but if you click the tilde key, it's left of the 1, hit that, and then click view selected. We got to zoom in here, and if I zoom out a little bit and middle mouse zoom out, you can see it's facing the wrong direction. So what we want to do is we want to click follow curve, and we also want to click it's backwards. We want to change this to -Y. So now it's facing the correct direction. And by default, it's just going to sit there. But then we're going to click animate path. And if I hit 0 to go into my camera view, and I hit spacebar, you're going to see this drone is flying in And again, our playback is really slow. I normally get more than just 2 to 3 frames per second. Maybe I'll just scrub down here. You'll see that this drone is flying in and getting right into the center. And if I keep dragging, you can see really clearly that we're getting this nice hover effect, which is cool. And then one thing to know, I still have this empty selected. You actually can even also add more keyframes to animate the rotation a bit. Like I think this actually is a dynamic, cool pose, but I could see maybe you want to adjust this a bit. So I'm going to jump back to the first frame by clicking here. I'm actually just going to hover over the rotation and hit I. And so add a keyframe for all of these. If I just scrub down here, this is where it kind of lands and hits. Maybe a little bit after it hits, I want to rotate a little bit. So you actually can click and drag these values. Maybe I'll straighten it out a little bit. Maybe I'll adjust this a little bit. Hit I. So now I have a keyframe where it's actually going to, go through this, and at the end here, we're just making sure we're really hitting that exact pose. And since we already did that hovering effect, it is going to keep hovering, but it could be cool maybe to have it do a little bit more dynamic and just adjust these values a little bit. If you go too far or if you mess with the motion too much, you might kind of make it look ugly. But if you're subtle with it, it'll add just kind of a nice little idle, slow move position. So, just think about it. You don't have to do that. I'm going to hit I to lock in that keyframe. Maybe go forward a bit, and maybe I'll do it one more time, and just just a little tweak, just so there's a little bit of more excitement and interest. It's just not sitting there, just a little bit, and then hit I. And again, we can do a test render to see the speed better later, and then those are optional, but I think we'll add just a little something to the scene. Okay, but the other thing I really want to do is I want to left click on this base, and I want these turrets to spin. It'll definitely be really cool. Let's go ahead. I'm going to drag to when it lands, so it hits here. I'm going to kind of let it hit and stay for a second, and then, so I want to hit I over the rotation here. And let's see, so over the course of the next, 3 seconds, so about 60, so I'm gonna go up to 180. And we can change this, let's see, I think it's the Y. Yep, so you can see they're spinning now. I'm gonna click in here, so 360 degrees is the full spin. Maybe I want it to spin 5 times, so I'm gonna hit the little star above the 8 and 5 and hit enter just to get the correct amount of rotations, and I'm going to hit I to lock that in. And so now if I move my mouse between those two keyframes, you can see these are spinning. And again, I want to be able to see how fast this is. So let me hit Z and go to solid. I'm going to click to go back to here, hit spacebar. We're only in 5 frames a second, so this isn't a great preview, but it might be pretty good. But we're definitely gonna have to do another test render to get our speed. So it did the spin once. I think that's cool. I'm gonna hit spacebar to stop it. So from here to here, I want to stop spinning again, but then I want to do one more spin. So I'm gonna hit I, and then I'm gonna go over further. Maybe I'll leave a little time before it ends. Maybe this time I just want to do a few less. I'm gonna click in here, and I actually am gonna delete out the D for a second, and then do plus, maybe let's do 1,000. Hit enter, hit I, and now if I go between these two keyframes, you can see they spin a little bit more at the end. Okay, so let's get that test render going to see if our speeds are working out right. So I actually am going to go back into that camera icon, go to workbench. You also can learn to play with these settings. You can get a little bit more interesting render than just this. I am going to go back into this print icon, and we don't even need 50. I'm just going to go ahead and just make this 25. We just need to be able to see the movement. But whatever you feel like doing, you can go between those values. And I'm going to go render animation, and again, it's really small, but it is rendering out this scene here, and I'm going to stop recording and come back when it's finished. Okay, mine is finished rendering here, so I'm going to close that box, click on render, and click on view animation, and it'll pop up with a box, and you can see the animation here. And actually I feel like, so it came in pretty nice. Those spun, they stopped, they spin again quickly. I actually think that's pretty good. We could make the flight in a little more dramatic and maybe add some tilting to the wings, like it's turning with the path a little bit more could be nice. But as for the spin of the turrets and the hovering and everything, I think it's overall pretty good. So I'm gonna close on that. But yeah, so we're using that to know that if you should, change any of these keyframes. And I do think I'm gonna tweak a little bit. I'm gonna left click on that empty here. I'm gonna go back to here, and I kind of want it to just kind of tilt. So let's see which rotation it is. I'm gonna try it's not the Z, is it the Y? Yeah, the Y. So I kind of want to have it, I think it's gonna be a little more interesting. It's got this dynamic turn to it. So I'm changed that Y value, and I'm gonna hit I to get those new keyframes. I'm just gonna kind of click through and see maybe at some point, like maybe about here, I should go back and change the Y back up a bit. Again, if you know flight patterns a little bit better than I do, you could tweak this to be more realistic. But I think it's just going to add something a little bit more dynamic to this scene. So maybe I'll actually go this way and then hit I. And I'm going to keep scrubbing through. And we've got that final keyframe. So it's kind of a little odd how it goes back. It hits, and then it goes back up kind of quickly. So maybe if I go back to this keyframe, maybe I don't like what I did there, and I'm gonna take it and maybe bring it, if I have it anything, maybe I'll just bring it to like a 4 and then hit I to lock that keyframe in. Just gonna click and drag, bring it in, and I think that looked a little bit more natural. But I'm actually gonna go ahead and do one more test render. So I'm gonna click render, render animation, and we'll come back once it's done. All right, the render's done, so I'm closing this, render, view animation, and let's just see. I'm gonna move it back to the center. It's gonna fly in. So it does have that little pull up, which I didn't love, but it wasn't so bad. I also wanna see, so it tilts there, tilts back a little bit. Again, you could fine tune this and make it look cooler. I think that's pretty good, but it probably could use, definitely could use some more tweaking. I'm gonna close that, but I'll leave that up to you. So that's pretty good. We've got one drone done. Now we just need to do the other 2 drones. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to left click on that path itself. I'm going to hit numpad 7 to my top view, middle mouse to scroll out, shift middle mouse to pan around. And I'm going to hold shift, hit D to duplicate. And I'm going to move this one over here. I kind of want this other drone to be offset over here. Hold shift, hit D. And I want another one to be over here, and they even can be a little bit different, distances from the X here. And then I'm gonna hit numpad 1 to my front view, zoom in a bit. I also want them to be different heights, so I've got this one selected. I'm gonna hit G, maybe move it to this height. Left click on this one, G, move it to this height. And just to give some more variety, in this bottom, I'm gonna left click on this to jump to the very first keyframe. And now let's actually turn on this drone too. So I'm going to zoom in, middle mouse, and I'm going to left click on that empty. Remember, the empty, not the arrow empty, but the other empty. Click on that, go to the constraints, click on follow path, left click on the eyedropper, and then left click on this guy. That's going to put it, if I zoom out a little bit, you can see it is on that path. We need to click the follow curve, and we need to click the negative Y and animate. So now if I click and drag here, you can see this one is also flying in. Very nice. So let's jump back to the beginning. I'm going to turn on the other drone. I'm going to left click on that empty that's at the bottom, add constraint, follow path, click on the eyedropper, click on the other one, follow curve, negative Y, animate path. So now if I click and drag here, you can see all 3 drones are flying in. If I hit 0, numpad 0 to go to my camera view, I can click and drag this over and see how it's looking so far. So that's a pretty good start. We're definitely going to want to tweak it a little bit, but that's good. Alright, and let's go back to making it look cool again. So let's hit Z and go to rendered. Oh, it's actually, we need to go click on the printer, actually no, the camera, and we need to change workbench to Eevee. So now we actually have where it looks good. And go back to the printer. I'm gonna go back and change this to 100 again, just so I don't forget, even though we might do another test render, but I just don't want to forget that. So this is looking pretty good. I'm gonna hit N to get rid of my right panel. So a couple issues is that one, this, when we kind of get to the end here, this drone is completely out of the camera. And this one's pretty good, but it's not in the exact best position. But what I can do is I can actually just left click on this path, and I'm gonna hit G and just kind of move it over until this drone is in a position that I'm happy with. I think something like that will be pretty good. And then I'm gonna left click on this one, hit G, bring it over, and again I'm just getting it somewhere I'm happy with. I'm gonna get near the top so it kind of peeks out above this other drone. And so now they're at least landing in the correct position, but now we want them to kind of face the camera where they're not currently. So we're really going to do what we did before, where we kind of adjusted the final pose of this one. So if I hit numpad 1, actually I need numpad 1, and zoom in a bit, I'm going to left click and get this empty for this drone here. Hit 0 to go into my camera view, numpad 0, and I'm going to click this to go back to the first frame. I'm going to hit N to bring up my right panel. Actually zoom out 1 just so I can see my full camera view here. And so I have that empty selected. I'm going to hit I to lock in the rotation here. And I'm going to left click and drag until I get to the point where they kind of hit and they're done. I think it happens at frame 120. And so somewhere around there, I'm just going to adjust these values here to make it more interesting. So I'm turning this one in so it's actually facing the camera. That'll be a little bit more intimidating. Let's just see if we want to adjust these values or not. I thought that was pretty good. Could tilt it down a little bit. Something like that I think will be pretty good. I'm gonna hit I, and just real quick, just to preview it, I'm gonna left click and drag in the bottom here. It's flying in, and yeah, I like how it's like looking at the camera here. That looks pretty good. So we want to do the same thing for the drone on the right. So I'm going to hit numpad 1 just to make it easier to left click and select on that empty. I'm going to hit numpad 0, jump back to the first frame. Just want to hit I to leave that rotation how it is there. Go around to frame 120 and adjust these values. Make it so it's facing the camera. I want to bring, really just playing with these values. Maybe I'll have the wings kind of come in this way on this one. Maybe tilt it back down a little bit. I'm gonna hit I to lock in that keyframe. And now we kind of have a good look where they're all at least looking at the camera. Maybe this one should even turn more. Let's see. Bring it more negative and turn it even more. And maybe it was better having the wings this way so it kind of peeks out more. Maybe that's better, but you know, really whatever you think looks good. I'm gonna hit I to lock in that keyframe. So one thing I want to adjust is if you did a test render of this, you'd see they're all hovering exactly in unison. You may like that, but I didn't think it looked really good. So to offset this, I'm gonna left click on this arrow here. If I hover my mouse down here and hit A, they actually were already selected, but you could hit A with your mouse down here to select all these keyframes, and hit G. And I'm just gonna move it over a bit. So I move it over so the first one's kind of around frame 16. And that's just so these aren't gonna be moving up and down exactly in unison. So I'm gonna do the same thing over here. I'm gonna left click on this one. You can see it's just like the same. If I left click on this one, you see they're all in the same position. If I left click here, if they're all selected, make sure they're all selected, hit A if they're not, hit G. And this one I'm maybe gonna move it so the first one's at, I don't know, 25. And it'll be more apparent when we do another render, but now they're at least hovering at different speeds and it just looks a little more realistic. So if I scrub through, you can kind of see they're kind of bouncing up and down at different times, which is, it just I think looks a little bit better. So go ahead and do that and save. So really at this point we're done. You could do another workbench render, just that will render really quick out to see how you like it. But I think let's just do a final render here. So it's at 100%. I got the camera, we're on Eevee. we have all these settings that we did earlier from level 1. Go back to the printer. We just need to set an output location. So I'm gonna click on that folder. I'm gonna go to my drone tutorial. I like to make a folder called renders. I'll go in there and name it just drone, hit enter, enter. And so at least we're saving our animation to a specific location. And you really would just click render animation and you would start outputting your video. I'm gonna show you one more trick though. So yeah, like I said, we could be done here, but I wanna take things a little bit further. This HDR in the background is kind of low res. You actually can get a higher res one at HDRI Haven. And that kind of solve the problem, but I'm gonna show you a quick and dirty way to blur the background a bit. This isn't the normal way you do it, but it's kind of a hacky way to do it. But if you hold Shift, hit A, hover over Mesh, and click on UV Sphere. I'm gonna hit S for scale, 300, and enter. I made it that big just to make sure it's bigger than everything in our scene. I'm gonna go over to the materials, click New, and where it says Principled, I'm gonna change that to a glass, change the IOR to 1. And if you adjust this roughness value, this will adjust how blurry that background is. So I think I'm going to take it maybe up to something like this. I think that looks pretty good. You also can play with the color a little bit here. You might, start getting a little too crazy here, but you kind of make it look like a dusk, or you can adjust this. I don't know I didn't really think about this too far, but I might, and you also can bring like the darkness down, so you can make it like a different time of day a little bit. Again, this is kind of hacky, but it gives you just like a little control over what's going on in the background. What would be good? Maybe make it kind of dusky a little bit, just a hint of blue, and maybe make it like a little bit darker. And again, I'm just gonna show you if I take the roughness all the way down to 0 and bring it up. So I just want to kind of blur it a bit to hide that it's not high quality and to really draw attention to the drones. So that's, just take things a little bit further, makes it a little bit better. And I'm gonna do one more thing. I think it's a little boring. If I click on the camera and the outliner here, I have it selected now. And if I click down here to jump back to the beginning, I think it's a little boring that the camera just stays perfectly in place. I'm actually not gonna move the camera, but we're gonna zoom it and we're gonna use the rotation. So I'm at frame 1. And I just want to lock in what we've got here. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a keyframe. So I'm going to hover over rotation, hit I. And if you have the camera selected here, I'm going to hit I on the focal length. I'm not going to adjust these values yet. I'm going to jump up to where they fly in. So right at 120. I'm also just going to hit I over this focal length and I over this rotation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move, let's maybe go by like every 30-ish frames. I want to just adjust these values just to make things more interesting. So the focal length, I'm going to click and drag to zoom in. Maybe let's go up to like 130. And I'm going to hit I for that keyframe. And then we can adjust these rotation values. This will add like a little tilt, so it could be like a little handheld. And you bring it up, and I'm going to hit I. So if I click and drag from here, from the beginning, over to this keyframe. Oh, actually, I need to go back. Let's go all the way back to the first frame. Let's go ahead and change this focal length to 130. I actually meant to change things on the very first keyframe. And actually, what we can do? We can just left click to just only have this first keyframe selected, hit X and enter. And if I left click on this keyframe and hit G, I can just go ahead and move it to frame 1. And so it's not perfectly in position, but let's adjust this value here. Again, maybe I will add a little tilt, get it kind of close to center, hit I. If I drag forward, maybe get to like here where there's a big adjustment, and I'm gonna move this over here. Maybe add that tilt a little bit, move it back. And again, this is kind of preference. This is up to you. Hit I. One thing to note is if you're making these keyframes really close, it's just, you can start actually making things worse. So to be subtle, you don't want to add like a million keyframes. It's just not going to look good if you add too many. So now I'm just scrubbing ahead to see if things still look good. So there's a weird thing where, maybe let's go about to here. The camera is at 63. Let's make this more like 55 and hit enter and then hit I. And that's just so that the focal length, rather than going all the way from what it was, like 63 down to 50 here, it's doing that earlier. And so we can see more of our drones. So if I drag in from here, let's see when we hit here. Yeah, I think that looks a lot better. And let's kind of scrub ahead, just make sure things still look good. And yeah, you could add also a little more camera move too here. Like if you wanted to, the camera's not done moving yet, you could maybe tilt around, maybe move it up a little bit, hit I. But like I said, you don't want to do too much or you actually could make things worse. But I think now we actually have it. Let's go back to the beginning. I'm gonna hit spacebar even though it's gonna be really slow. My playback, especially while I'm recording things, is extra slow. And you just wanna make sure that the drones are staying in the frame and you've kind of got an interesting camera move going on. But feel free to tweak any of these keyframes to get them looking really good. One thing to kind of note is if I hit spacebar to stop things, if I click on this keyframe, you can see we've got that banking going on. It looks a little weird not having it on this these other two. So maybe I'm actually gonna take the Y and rotate it negative a little bit so it also is banking like the other one is, and hit I on that. I'm gonna left click on this one, go ahead and bring this one over negative a bit. It just looked a little weird without them all doing this banking. Hit I, just gonna click and drag, and again we're just making sure things look good. It's moving in pretty fast here. We're coming in, and let's just make sure our final pose still looks good. Yep, that looks good. Okay, so really, now we're just ready to go hit render animation, and you can be completely done. But I lied. I've got one more tip after this. We can actually add motion blur with Eevee now. Okay, I've got the exact same file open, but this time I opened it up in Blender 2.9. At the time of recording this, 2.9 is still experimental, but it does have a feature of motion blur, object motion blur in Eevee. So that will just make things look more interesting. So if I go to the camera icon and open up, I can click on motion blur and open this up. The shutter will affect how much motion blur there is. If you make it like 0.1, there'd be a lot of motion blur. If you make it like 10, there'd probably be none. So one thing you can do is you can go to different spots in your animation and do a quick test render and see how it looks. I already did this testing and I actually found that 0.5 worked really well for this scene. Steps will control the quality of it. I found the value of 5 is pretty good. But for example, so if I jump to here and if I hit F12 to do a render, it'll render it out. And let's see, come on. So it's hard, you can't really see here, but there is a little extra blur here. You could take the value higher, but let me show you. I'm gonna close that, show you where it's like right to where it's about to hit. Something like here, it's gonna be really obvious. Let's see, maybe something like here. If I hit F12, wait it for it to render. Actually, that wasn't the best example. Let me close that one more time. Let me go to where, because it's already slowing down a decent amount at that point. If I go to 94, if I render this one, it's still at a high speed, so we should see some good motion blur here. So let's see. Okay, there we go. So you can really see there's some motion blur. And this is the way our eyes really work, and even the cameras would work depending on the shutter speed. So this will add a lot of realism to the scene. So I'm gonna go ahead and close that, and as simple as render animation, and we're done at this point. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please like and subscribe. Those really are the things that motivate me the most to keep making more tutorials. Also on my website you can donate monetarily, but really just I hope you enjoyed it, and look out for more of my tutorials.